Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're taking a look at the new Harry Potter series that's in the works over at HBO Max.
Yes.
And we're going to be talking specifically about some of the casting rumors that have been swirling around. And as always, we've got some great sources to dig into.
Absolutely.
So I think one of the most interesting things that's popped up recently is this rumor about Paapa Essiedu. You might recognize him from the show I May Destroy You.
Yes, a very talented British actor.
Yeah. And the rumor is that he's being considered for the role of Severus Snape.
And this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because Snape is such an iconic character from the books and the films.
Yeah.
And he was so memorably portrayed by Alan Rickman.
Oh, absolutely. So to even think about recasting that role is kind of daunting, I think, for a lot of fans.
It's a huge challenge for sure.
Yeah.
And the sources we've got today actually reflect a real mix of opinions on this potential casting choice.
And it's interesting, too, because The Hollywood Reporter mentioned that the series is aiming for a diverse cast, which is a pretty big departure from the predominantly white cast of the original films.
Right. And that really taps into this broader conversation that's happening about representation in media, especially in these big franchises. We see it with Harry Potter. We see it with the Percy Jackson series.
Oh, yeah. There was actually quite a bit of backlash when they cast a black actor as Zeus in the Percy Jackson adaptation.
There was, I mean, you can't please everyone, right?
Right. But it does raise some interesting questions about how these decisions are made and how fans react.
Yeah, I mean, it's this tricky balancing act between honoring the original source material and also reflecting the world we live in today.
It's almost like this whole question of what creative license filmmakers have when they're adapting something.
Exactly.
I mean, remember what happened with Lavender Brown in the Harry Potter films?
Oh, yes.
She was initially played by black actresses in the earlier films, but then later on she was recast with a white actress for a more prominent role.
And there was a lot of controversy around that. Some fans saw it as a case of whitewashing, especially because Lavender's race wasn't explicitly stated in the books.
Right.
So it really sparked this debate about interpretation versus erasure.
It's a fascinating discussion, and it kind of ties back into this whole Snape casting situation, too, because this critical source we have, they really dig into this idea of Paapa Essiedu as Snape, and they don't hold back on their concerns.
Yeah, they raise some very specific points about whether Essiedu would actually be the right fit for Snape's physicality and personality.
They actually cite descriptions from the books that emphasize Snape's gaunt and sullen nature.
It's interesting that they bring that up because those descriptions could be interpreted in different ways.
And it makes you wonder if their concerns are more about the visual aspect than the actual acting ability.
Right, because Essiedu is undeniably a talented actor.
Oh, absolutely.
But this source also uses terms like blackwashing and trendy casting, and I think it's worth unpacking those terms a bit. What do they imply about this author's perspective? Do you agree with their assessment?
It's definitely a strong stance, and it shows just how passionate Harry Potter fans are about these characters and their portrayal.
Yeah, it's clear that people have strong feelings about this, and it's important to acknowledge that.
But it's also crucial to remember that nothing's been officially confirmed yet. It's all speculation at this point.
Exactly. And HBO has even stated that they'll only confirm casting details once deals are finalized.
Right. So we're all just kind of in this waiting game. But in the meantime, I think this situation raises a much bigger question. How should studios approach casting these iconic characters in reboots and adaptations?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. What factors should they prioritize? Is it about finding an actor who physically resembles the character as they're described in the books? Or is it more about finding someone who can capture the essence of the character regardless of their physical attributes?
And where does representation fit into all of this?
Exactly. Is there a way to balance staying true to the original vision while also making the cast more inclusive?
It's a tough challenge.
It is, and I think that's where things get really interesting.
Absolutely.
So as we delve deeper into this topic, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What stands out to you in all of this?
Well, one thing that really strikes me is that this whole debate kind of boils down to like a fundamental question, you know? What is the purpose of a reboot or an adaptation?
Well, that's a good question.
Is it to like slavishly recreate the original work, you know, like down to every last detail? Or is it to reimagine it and reinterpret the story for a new audience and potentially bring like some fresh perspectives to the table?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like there are two camps.
Right, exactly.
You've got the purists who want like a faithful recreation of the original, and then you have those who are more open to like significant changes.
And both perspectives have valid points.
Yeah.
The purists often argue that, like, the original work holds a special place in their hearts, and they want to see that respected and honored.
Yeah.
They're afraid that any changes, especially to beloved characters, could kind of diminish the magic of the story for them.
Totally. I get that.
Yeah.
But then there's the argument that a reboot or an adaptation should reflect, like, the times in which it's made.
Yes.
I mean, the world has changed a lot since the Harry Potter books were first published.
Absolutely.
And even since the films were released, there's a much greater awareness now of diversity and representation. And some people argue that it's essential for these stories to evolve and reflect that.
And it's not just about ticking boxes or meeting quotas, right? It's about recognizing that the world is a tapestry of different cultures, ethnicities, and experiences.
Right.
And when we see that reflected in the stories we consume,
Yeah.
it can really broaden our understanding of the world and of each other.
It can also make these stories feel more relatable and relevant to a wider audience.
Exactly.
But I can imagine it's like a real challenge for filmmakers to find that balance, to make changes that feel authentic and meaningful without alienating the core fan base.
It's a tightrope walk for sure.
It is.
And this whole Snape casting situation is like a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have fans who are completely resistant to the idea of anyone other than Alan Rickman playing Snape.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other hand, you have those who see this as an opportunity to bring a fresh perspective to the character and potentially address the lack of diversity in the original series.
It's fascinating how this conversation has evolved over time. I mean, in the past, there might not have been as much scrutiny or debate around casting choices.
Yeah, it's true.
But now with social media and online fandom, every decision is amplified and analyzed in real time.
It's true. The level of engagement and passion from fans is remarkable, and it's a double-edged sword.
It is.
On the one hand, it shows just how deeply these stories resonate with people and how much they care about seeing them adapted faithfully. But on the other hand, it can create a lot of pressure on the filmmakers and sometimes lead to, like, toxic negativity.
Yeah, it's like navigating a minefield of opinions and expectations. But ultimately, the filmmakers have to make the choices that they believe are best for the story they're trying to tell.
Exactly. They have to trust their instincts, their vision, and their understanding of the source material, and they have to be prepared to face the inevitable scrutiny and debate that comes with adapting a beloved franchise.
Right.
But I think it's also important for fans to go into this with an open mind and a willingness to see the story unfold in new and unexpected ways.
Yeah, I totally agree. And who knows, maybe this new series will surprise us all. Maybe it will find that sweet spot between honoring the original and expanding upon it in ways we never imagined.
That's the beauty of adaptation, isn't it? It's a chance to revisit familiar stories with fresh eyes and discover new layers of meaning and magic.
Yeah.
And even if we don't agree with every casting choice or creative decision, the conversation itself is valuable.
Oh, absolutely.
It allows us to engage with these stories on a deeper level and explore the themes and ideas that resonate with us most.
Well said.
Yeah.
And speaking of exploring things, something I found particularly interesting in our source material was the author's focus on the term trendy casting.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be implying that casting a Black actor as Snape is just like following a trend, rather than a genuine attempt to bring more diversity to the series.
Yeah, and that's where things get really nuanced. Because on the surface, it's easy to dismiss that argument as just being resistant to change.
Right.
But it also raises some valid questions about, like, the intentions behind casting decisions. Is it about genuine representation?
Yeah.
Or is it about optics and appearing progressive?
It's a tricky line to walk, for sure.
It is.
And it makes me think about, like, the broader context of the Harry Potter series. If they're aiming for a more diverse cast, why focus solely on recasting a character like Snape? Why not also explore the possibility of casting actors of color in roles that were originally portrayed as white?
That's a great point. It goes back to that idea of tokenism versus genuine inclusion. If the diversity is limited to a handful of characters, it can feel like a superficial attempt to appease certain demographics,
right,
rather than a genuine commitment to creating a more representative world.
Right. And it makes me wonder if the filmmakers are potentially missing an opportunity to reimagine the wizarding world in a truly inclusive way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it. The original books and films were largely centered around a predominantly white group of characters. But what if this new series took like a bolder approach?
What if they explored the possibility of casting actors of color in roles that were originally portrayed as white?
Exactly.
It would certainly spark a lot of conversation,
Yeah.
but it could also be a really powerful statement about the evolving nature of representation in storytelling.
It would challenge our preconceived notions of who these characters are.
Yeah.
And it could potentially open up new dimensions to the story.
Exactly. Imagine, for example, if characters like Ron Weasley or Hermione Granger were portrayed by actors from different ethnic backgrounds.
That would be fascinating.
It could lead to some really interesting explorations of identity and belonging within the wizarding world.
And it could also allow for more nuanced discussions about race and prejudice.
Absolutely. Imagine a scene where a Black Hermione faces discrimination within the wizarding community.
Oh, wow.
It would add a layer of complexity and realism that was absent from the original series.
It's definitely a thought-provoking idea.
Yeah.
And while it might be a departure from the source material, it could ultimately enrich the story and make it resonate with a wider audience.
Ultimately, the decisions about casting and representation rest with the filmmakers. But I think it's important for fans to engage in these conversations and voice their opinions thoughtfully.
Yeah.
This is an opportunity to shape the future of this beloved franchise and make it more inclusive and representative of the world we live in.
Well said. So as we eagerly await more news about the Harry Potter series, I think it's important for us to continue to explore these questions and challenge ourselves to think critically about representation in media. Who knows? Maybe this new series will surprise us all with its bold choices and fresh perspectives.
And even if it doesn't, the conversations we're having now are a sign of progress. They show that we're becoming more aware of the importance of diversity and inclusion, and that we're demanding better representation in the stories we love.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought. What would the wizarding world look like if it truly reflected the diversity of our own world? Let us know your thoughts. Until next time, keep those wands at the ready.